This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Hello and welcome to the June 4th, 2025 edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast. I'm agronomist Brian Schrader on the eastern side of the state of Indiana, joined as always by my co-hosts, Joern from western Indiana and Ben Jacob from southern Indiana. Good morning, guys.
Howdy, fellas.
Good morning.
Well, fellas, 2 weeks have passed. Lots of things have happened and have not happened is unfortunately maybe the way we should start the podcast. Ben, the not happening part, unfortunately, is in your part of the world. Is it starting to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day for you down there?
Yeah, it really is. Although there's enough happening right now, we're down to where we have pockets that are just kind of brutal. My house happens to set in one of those. So, it's all running together a little bit, but before the last round of rains, we were very close. We got some ground worked, and if we'd had another 48 hours, probably could have gotten most of the locally planted. It may be fit to run again today, it looks like. So with the forecast, we have probably 2.5 days to get after it here before we have another round of rain. But overall, across the area I've covered over the past 2 weeks, we have made pretty good progress, I think.
So how you've got 2 days of running, Ben, if you could run sustained, how many days would it take for you to get the rest of the crop in southern Indiana into the ground the first time? Let's just start there.
So some guys just need a day or two to wrap up. Unfortunately, those are the wet holes that they're still waiting on, and they may not get there in this window. But we have some operations that are setting at just barely above zero, and they'd probably need 7 to 10 days to really get everything in the ground. I mean, to go from 0 to 100, that's what it's going to take. But if this rain this week happened to push back a day, or we didn't get 3 days of rain, we could make pretty good progress here in a pretty short amount of time. But it's just, we're sitting here in the first week of June. The prevent plant deadline's coming up. The commodity prices are what they are, and so there's going to be a lot of thought, I think, put into this year. And I know nobody wants to farm for an insurance check, but there's been a lot of conversations of, at this point, why would I plant this?
What's your advice? I mean, obviously you can't make those decisions for growers. We understand that as agronomists. That's not our job. We're just supposed to advise and, answer questions. What has been your advice for those guys that are starting to contemplate, given that insurance deadline approaching? How have you tried to talk through those conversations?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different camps. There's the camp that hasn't done anything, doesn't have any burn down, doesn't have any chemistry out, doesn't have any nitrogen out, and that's one conversation. And I try to frame it as, yes, I understand all the implications of this year, but there's also a carry-through effect of having that fallow ground going into next year. Okay, and so we need to be mindful of that. And a lot of folks got to experience that in 2020 when we had a bunch of prevent plant in 2019. So it is real. And can it be managed through? Yes, it can. But I really don't like to see the weedy fields laying fallow. And that's another part of the conversation, honestly, too, is without a crop out there and managing those weeds, what you're doing to your seed bank. Now, if you already have inputs in that field, it's pretty tough to walk away from that. Prevent plant payments might get you back to zero depending on how much you put into it already, but you're not going to make any money on that ground this year.
No.
And then there's all the dynamics. Is it owned? Is it rented? Is it a cash rent or share crop? All that, is cash rented ground, depending on how good your landlords are, that's a pretty tough proposition too. You really need to get a crop off a lot of that. So the conversations are all over the place. I do not like seeing fallow ground. I think that it makes things more challenging for the future. So I also, understand that we can grow pretty good corn in June.
Sure.
We have in recent history, we've grown really good corn. And I'm also of the opinion that the start that a corn crop gets off to is very important to the overall success of it. So this is really the first time that it looks like we've got a good window of heat accumulation. I mean, we came off last week was very cool. We had, I think one day we didn't even hit 60, all right, towards the end of May. So we've got a good window here of heat coming up. We'll see what the weather does, but this is the first time all season where we can say with quite a bit of confidence that if we get seed in the ground, unless we get too much moisture, it's going to come out of the ground quick and uniform. And I really do believe that matters and the end result of your corn crop.
Oh, no doubt. I'll completely agree with that. Carl, a little bit different situation for you. I think you're probably, if not done, probably approaching it pretty close here, maybe in the next day or two. Give us kind of an update on the western side of Indiana.
Yeah, can empathize with Ben on the, we saw that in 19 and also in 20 in pockets with the prevent plant and just not catching a break. So I think this year we're on the opposite side. I don't think we've had a window to get the crop in as efficiently as what we did. And we've really been wrapped up for the better part of a couple of weeks here up in Northwest Indiana, Northeast Illinois. So we've had some good running and, there's artifacts of that with the big dust storm that came through, we talked about on last podcast, ground's blowing, that means that it's probably not been too wet to not be able to plant. So you're seeing some of that out there, but we're sitting pretty nicely here. To Ben's point about how cool we've been, the last 3 weeks, we've had several instances of getting down into the low 40s, at least mid 40s, unsurprisingly. But on some of my muck pockets where, ambient air can drift cooler yet, it wouldn't surprise me if we found some frost pockets out there, so something for us to be mindful of. But really, biggest thing that I think we are seeing locally is just the height of the crop, the maturation. You're still seeing, good corn development and good soybean development, but it's maybe slower than what folks would think for sitting here at the first week of June after getting things in late April and early May. And so just something that we probably ought to be mindful of is not taking for granted how developed that short stature plant might be, because that can definitely influence our herbicide application. So it's been great for side dressing. There's been a lot of folks that can get over some shorter corn and not worry about any iron blight, if you will. But we're looking at a little bit smaller crop, but a good start to the crop. So far things are looking pretty good. How about in your neck of the woods, Brian? What's the latest?
Yeah, in the geography that I cover, specifically, I've got a small little pocket in Randolph County, Indiana, Winchester area that just very similar to Ben. Every time it rains, they catch it. And then about the time that it dries up and it's fit to go, it rains again. And so for us, that's the one area in my geography that we need to get finished up. Hopefully, several guys this week, if we can hold off the rain, will get in and get pretty good. But as Ben mentioned, it's a very similar story in that geography as well. You've got folks that are just barely started, and then you've got guys that just need a window of a couple days to be able to finish up. As you move further north on the east side of the state, our colleague Lance Shepard, Lance has got an area from about Decatur, Indiana, up through the Fort Wayne area and north of Fort Wayne a little bit that just, again, can't seem to catch a break. And so you've got guys just all over the board in terms of planting. And so those are the two places on the east side of the state. Again, a few other pockets in some small geographies, but those are the two largest geographies in terms of needing to finish. As you said, Carl, you've got corn all over the place. You've got corn that's pushing that V5 stage right now. Gorgeous looking stuff that's already been side dressed or even had pre-plant ammonia put on that's just off to the races. And then you've got stuff just literally next door that's you're digging in just to make sure that emergence is good. And so we've got a lot of variability in our crop height and crop stage both. And so that's going to present a few challenges, I think, for us, especially here on our side, just given the amount of post corn herbicide applications that go on and trying to be a little mindful of what our neighbors look like. So that's going to be an important thing for us to try to manage as we move forward. But overall, I think the crop that I've looked at looks good. We're going to have a few replant areas here and there, but I expect it to be more of a typical Eastern Indiana kind of replant scenario rather than something just disastrous. So that'll probably, that'll be the other focus that we'll need to make here in the next handful of days and make some decisions that way. Ben, I want to circle back. We touched on it, you mentioned it, but I think it's worth commenting on because Carl mentioned it as well. This issue, and I experienced it in 20, this idea of leaving the ground fallow and the challenges that come along with that. You mentioned the weed seed potential, in those situations. I believe crop insurance says you either have to have some kind of cover crop or something in it, but you can also just keep the weeds down, either sprayed or tilled or whatever. But I want to talk just briefly about this fallow piece because that is something that's incredibly important for those guys who decide to go the prevent plant route and understanding what kind of impact the following year that will have, in my mind, especially if you're going to a corn crop. But I also understand that. So maybe you guys, because you both mentioned it, maybe it's worth talking about this fallow piece just briefly so folks understand what we're talking about when we mention that.
Yeah, well, to me, Brian, it's one of those things that simply boils down to soil health. When you let ground lay fallow for the year, you deplete or kill off, however you want to word it, your mycorrhizal fungal populations, and those happen to be very important for phosphorus uptake. So, I mean, you nailed it that corn is more impacted than soybeans are. But so, if you do have fallow ground, I'm thinking back to 2020, we shifted up a bunch of rotations and, put soybeans where corn otherwise would have went. But essentially there's phosphorus in your soil, but without the fungal populations, the uptake of it's going to be limited. Right. And, a cover crop might be a good strategy to prevent that and prevent weeds as well. But at the same time, I'm going to circle back to we can still grow a really good crop in June. So, I wouldn't write it off just yet. But Carl, you have anything to add on fallow ground syndrome?
No, you nailed it. That concept of fallow corn syndrome, Ben. I won't repeat for the sake of redundancy here, but just to your point, I mean, you look at 19, we had a hellaciously good corn crop. I remember presenting at the Pro Farmer Crop Tour and saying, all right, look at all these dates when you planted so late. It would not surprise me as you're wandering into fields that you're not going to see the yields that one would expect to. And they do things a little early, so you're not quite through the kernel depth filling stages yet. And returns were surprisingly good. Only thing that bit us in 19 was we just had a kind of cool, wet October to not help facilitate dry down. But the crop matured and we had exceptionally good corn. And it kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater about this idea of late planted corn doesn't yield. Well, if you have the right growing season, you sure can get it. The one thing that I think bears repeating though is just this idea of cost savings, and you will not have cost savings on a herbicide and weed management standpoint because you are going to have to actively manage that barren acre. And if you don't, then we will be paying for it for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
And back to this idea of, well, do you bring in soybeans if corn, if it's feeling too late for corn and you're risk averse, if you don't have the nitrogen down, do you evaluate a cover crop? I would seriously consider the implications of letting it sit fallow because it's not coming at a zero cost for zero revenue trade.
Perhaps a bit of a loaded question or a loaded comment on my part. In 2019, we were very early into the biological space. And so when we had these situations that went fields where we decided to go fallow, I know in 20, there were lots of folks that were selling what was reported to be mycorrhizae in a jug is probably the most polite way to say this. I'll just flat say this. My experience was limited, but my limited experience, I don't know that I feel like those folks got what they had paid for. Now we are, 5 years removed from that, but the biological space has come a long, long way. So I don't want to discount that. Just having known some of the advances that have come along. Any thoughts for these guys that do choose to go that way, and this idea that biologicals might be something for them to go to?
I still think Carl nailed it, Brian. It's not, if you leave it fallow, it's not a zero cost.
No, that's true.
Thing. Like you will have to do something. And, I think maybe the weed control piece is the most significant, but maybe there is an option. The Nutritia P, we've had some pretty good results with it and some phosphorus limited locations. So, maybe that is an option. I'm not going to say that you can't, put a bit of a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound here, but
sure.
I still think that there are a lot of ifs with that. And to be quite frank, like, we talk about systems quite a bit and managing the system as a whole. That's probably trial work that doesn't exist, right? To go from fallow ground to adding some sort of biological to try and improve it. Certainly there's a potential for that, but man, it's a bit of a shot in the dark because I can't imagine, and without having spent a significant amount of time digging into this space, I just can't imagine that data is out there that says that yes, we can in this particular situation and system make this application and have a positive result with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
somewhat narrowcasting with the conversation related to, prevent plant and, delayed planting in corn. But if we were to expand that to managing crops as they are planted later, I'm not of the opinion that we are managing them any differently than what we would the April and May planting. And so that just comes back to the comment of still have a lot of yield potential that remains on the table. Yes, there is some risk and vulnerability baked in here, but also, you remove all risk from the table, you have zero reward, which is what the, prevent plant offering is. The beans, a different story, right? We've talked several times on this program about increase your seeding rate to account for the lack of nodule development and components of yield there. So 10% for every week that passes by, starting in late May is probably a good idea there. But really just, again, conveying this idea of there's a really good opportunity to make a very good crop, but we can't have it if we don't try.
Carl, I'm going to quote our good friend Ben Jacob on this. The plan is the plan for a reason. And so, did I get that right, Ben?
That's something
you say
to that effect, Brian.
If you're gonna plant your corn, manage your corn like you were gonna.
Right.
You plan to, manage your corn. I think that's the best advice that I can give anybody. You had that plan for a reason, so let's stick with it. Changing gears a little bit here, just because we've talked around the edges. We've talked about phosphorus. We've talked about the cool temperature. All three of us over the last couple weeks have gotten phone calls, text messages, photos of corn that has turned purple or red or even potentially almost black. Let's talk a little bit about that. As seasoned Pioneer professionals, this is not our first rodeo with this at all. But we want to make sure folks understand, because sometimes this conversation can get really diluted with a lot of other things rather than just what it is. So let's dig into this a little bit, maybe as our final topic. Carl, maybe we'll start with you. Go ahead.
I'd like to give it a stab, knowing we've got a resident, crop physiologist on the call here in terms of training and background with Ben Jacob. So Ben, you correct me if I've got this wrong, but if you're a grower and you have seen a neighbor's field turn purple or a different shade of green, rest assured that if it's the whole field, it's probably on purpose. If it's pockets, then that's where we can go through some diagnoses of why, you might be seeing some of those purpler pockets. And Brian, just to what you said about, phosphorus potential deficiencies, if the whole field is the same shade of purple, then that's probably telling us the whole field is not in a, phosphorus limited environment. So that aside, there is a very well understood genetic correlation to purpling in corn. And it does manifest under colder conditions, downright cool or cold conditions, 60s during the days, 40s during the evening. And again, for that neighbor, rest assured that it'll be okay, because we've done a good amount of research within Pioneer, because this is an artifact of some Pioneer genetics of because it's purple, does that mean that there's not enough green stuff inside? And when you analyze for chlorophyll content, those plants that are purple versus those that are green, they have the same chlorophyll content. So that means the factory hasn't shut down. It's not, running inefficiently. It's not like window tint on your pickup truck's windows. The same amount of heat is still getting in. We're still running the factory at full tilt. But if somebody wanted to know why you have that purpling, it's just a concentration of plant sugars. That's all it is. The plant is harvesting the solar radiation during the day, and then the metabolism's perhaps a little bit slower because of the temperatures. And so you just have this accumulation of what we call anthocyanins, but that's a fancy way of saying plant sugar in the surface of the leaf tissue. And you see that in certain products because they just have more genes that are more highly correlated to that, that phenotypic response. So all corn plants have 5, more or less, but some of them might have all 8 that contribute to this idea of purple corn syndrome, if you will. But rest assured, not yield limiting. And if anything, it just helps you better understand genetics and the diversity that one can get from pioneer corn.
And Ben, I'm right to say here that the field that would be mine that is still green and my neighbor's that is purple, they're both accumulating those sugars. It's just this anthocyanin, this red that we're seeing in certain hybrids that's accumulated. But this physiological process is happening when it's cool like this across all corn. It's not just this accumulation happening in the hybrids that have a propensity to turn reddish purple, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And what Carl mentioned about the genes that, all hybrids have at least the 5 genes that can express this red pigment. Some can have up to 8. It turns out that of the 3 that are more variable in their appearance, at least a subset of them are temperature sensitive. So under cool conditions, they overexpress this anthocyanin, this purple pigment. So, what that means and what you'll observe in the field is that once we get the heat, the purple goes away. Now it'll stay. It's not mobile. It'll stay in those leaves, but as new growth comes out, it'll maintain its greenness, if you will. And, as someone who's spent the majority of my career in some capacity and product evaluation, a lot of times, if you're looking at a small plot, it's 2-row plots, or you've got 100,000 entries out and 17.5 foot 2 rows. So a lot of the times the stuff that turned purple early in the season is kind of what I like at the end of the year. That's not 100%, but it's amazing how many times throughout my career I'd have a note on something new, that hey, this was purple early, and we get to R5 and that's. We'll see what the combine says, but this is one that's higher up on my list at this point. So, I get it. It's tough to look at. Some folks are more sensitive to it than others. That there is very much a genetic component to it, but really all it means is that we need some heat. And if you're having a hard time looking at it, if you have a purple field, that just take the long way around the block for the next 2 weeks, and it'll be much better by then.
I have always been surprised, though, Ben, with the amount of heat that we typically get after these spells, the cool spells. I'm always surprised at just how little time it takes for the plant to go back to green. It really could be literally a couple days even, and you'll start to see that purple color dissipate. And typically I feel like the new growth is much greener when we come out of that. Now that may just be my eyes playing tricks on me, but I do find that when we do finally get a warm snap after this, that a lot of times that early growth right after that just appears to me to be a bit more green. Carl?
You're on it with the optical illusion, though, Brian, because it does look like the corn plant has just vanished. If you had the the start to a decent emergence and you have green and then it shuts down cold and it turns purple, it looks like the corn plant just stopped growing or it has less vigor, more spindly. And I cannot tell you how many comments that I've had from folks that are experiencing perhaps Pioneer or 1742, as that is a popular purpler for us, seeing that for the first time this year and just wondering where on earth it is. And if you go and dig up the side by side, plants, from one brand versus ours, it's not as though the purple corn's vanished. It's harder to see against the nice dark soil of the spring. And so you compare those two plants, and 1742 is usually not the spindly one. Actually, it just looks that way because you can't see as much green. So
yeah, for sure.
no, a couple entertaining anecdotes. Longtime Pioneer folks would tease about it being the yield gene when you see the purple there. And I think that's just to Ben's point, it does seem as though there's some loose correlation to there being successful products that contain these purple pigments. And I even had a guy reach out and say, the Pioneer trapezoid should be not green but purple, related to their genetic propensity to purple. So
yeah. Well, guys, last thing that I have top of mind here, only because we've talked about, variability of size of corn. We've talked about these cool conditions, which tend to slow development down. We've got a lot of folks that are starting to circle back around for post herbicide applications on corn. I'd just be mindful of those labels and ensure as well that you are growth staging that corn right. Herbicide labels can be all over the place depending on the company that does it. They want actual physical size with a tape measure. Some of them want leaf, growth stage, V stage, those kind of things. And so just be cognizant of what the label on the product that you are using is, and be sure that is the growth stage that your corn is at. If you have, in a lot of cases, a lot of post applications are, somewhere between that 12 and 20 inch. But if they've got a V stage there, use whatever's most restrictive. Don't, we know that from V5 to V7, that's really an important time for ear formation. We don't want to, do anything that would cause any kind of impact there. And so, again, just be cognizant of where your particular corn plant is. And quite honestly, if you're spraying next to your neighbor, be a little bit cognizant of what their growth stage is as well, especially if you're spraying something that could potentially go haywire if it was sprayed in the wrong window. And so just something I always keep in mind, especially as we have these years where the countryside's just scattered with growth stages on corn. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add there or not, Ben.
Yeah, Brian, that's a good call out. And if you think back to our last episode where Carl talked about sandblasted corn and talked about tornadoes and hail, oh my, just counting those leaves are probably not sufficient with some of the issues we've had this year. If your cutoff is V8, you probably need to dig that plant up, look for the crown, and then start counting nodes up from that. Which I get that's more helpful with the visual. There's some great videos from the Pioneer Agronomy Library that can walk you through exactly how to do that and what to look for. But just keep that in mind that, and even corn that wasn't damaged by the weather and the environment, at a certain stage it starts to lose those leaves. So by the time you get to V8, you could have dropped a leaf or two already off the bottom of it. Yeah. So just keep that in mind, that it's not as simple always as just counting the leaves that have a color emerged. And the variability of this year is what it is. And so it's a good call out to work through. But that's all I have to add.
Carl, your thoughts on this particular situation?
Nope, nailed it. Label's the law, and it's there for a good reason, to protect your neighbors and also to protect yourself from yourself. Last thing we want to do is use a great tool too late in the season and it winds up biting us in the keister because, developmentally the plant was further along and therefore vulnerable to, the product we're putting out there. So not creating rules, to cramp anybody's style. It's just we want to make sure everybody's protected from using their best judgment there. So just standard call out. You got it.
All right. Well, guys, I think we've probably covered a pretty good range of things this morning on the podcast. I guess, Carl, if somebody heard something and they'd like to reach out to you and visit a little bit more about that, how could they follow along or get a hold of you?
Yeah, check out on Facebook. That's at Joern Agronomy. And Brian, how about yourself?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at B_K_Schrader, SHRADER. And Ben, how about you?
Yep, you can find me on Facebook as well at Ben Jacob Agronomy.
All right. Well, guys, appreciate the time this morning. Hope for our listeners, this was valuable information. Hopefully, as you start to listen to this, if you're not finished, you're getting closer. And we know that as we get a little bit later into June, things seem a little bit more hectic. We certainly hope that you stay safe and are mindful of everything going on around you. And so thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.